And this verse says, only because of different causes does a person see a difference between himself and others. Just as one sees the reflection of a body appearing differently, manifested on water, on oil, or in a mirror. Purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. The spirit soul is one, the Supreme Personality Godhead. He is manifested in Svamsa and Vibhinamsa expansions. Jivas are Vibhinamsa expansions, the different incarnations of the Supreme Personality of Godhead are Svamsa expansions. Thus, there are different potencies of the Supreme Lord, and there are different expansions of the different potencies. In this way, for different reasons, there are different expansions of the same one principle, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. This understanding is real knowledge. But when the living entity is covered by the upadi, or designated body, he sees differences exactly as one sees differences in reflections of oneself on water, on oil, or in a mirror. When something is reflected on the water, it appears to be moving. When it is reflected on ice, it appears fixed. When it is reflected on oil, it appears hazy. The subject is one, but under different conditions, it appears differently. When the qualifying factor is taken away, the whole appears to be one. In other words, when one comes to the Paramahansa, or perfectional stage of life, by practicing bhakti yoga, he sees only Krishna everywhere. For him, there is no other objective. In conclusion, due to different causes, the living entity is visible in different forms as an animal, human being, demigod, tree, etc. Actually, every living entity is the marginal potency of the Supreme Lord. In Bhagavad Gita 5.18, therefore, it is explained that one who actually sees the spirit soul does not distinguish between a learned Brahmana and a dog, an elephant or a cow. Pandita Samadarshina, one who is actually learned sees only the living entity, not the outward covering. Differentiation is therefore the result of different karma or fruitive activities. And when we stop fruitive activities, turning them into acts of devotion, we can understand that we are not different from anyone else, regardless of the form. This is only possible in Krishna consciousness. In this movement, there are many different races of men from all parts of the world participating. But because they think of themselves as all parts of the world, think of themselves as servants of the Supreme Personality Godhead, they do not differentiate between black and white, yellow and red. The Krishna consciousness movement is therefore the only means to make the living entities free of all designations. Very good. So it doesn't matter what color of skin a person has. Everyone, every human being has a chance to be Krishna conscious, regardless of the color of the skin or any other physical identification. What's important is their spiritual identification as a devotee. Text 30. When one's mind and senses are attracted to sense objects for enjoyment, the mind becomes agitated As a result of continually thinking of sense objects, one's real consciousness almost becomes lost. Like the water in a lake that is gradually sucked up by the big grass straws on its bank. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. In this verse, it is very nicely explained how our original Krishna consciousness becomes polluted and we gradually become almost completely forgetful of our relationship with the Supreme Lord. In the previous verse, it is recommended that we should always keep in touch with the devotional service of the Lord so that the blazing fire of devotional service can gradually burn into ashes material desires, and we can become liberated from the repetition of birth and death. This is also how we can indirectly keep our staunch faith in the lotus feet of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. When the mind is allowed to think of sense gratification continuously, it becomes the cause of our material bondage. If our mind is simply filled with sense gratification, even though we want Krishna, by continuous practice, we cannot forget the subject matter of sense gratification. If one takes up the sannyasa order of life, but is not able to control the mind, he will think of objects of sense gratification, namely family, society, expensive houses, etc. Even though he goes to the Himalayas or the forest, his mind will continue thinking of the objects of sense gratification. In this way, gradually, one's intelligence will be affected. When the intelligence is affected, one loses his original taste for Krishna consciousness. The example given here is very appropriate. If a big lake is covered all around by long kusha grass, just like columns, the waters dry up. Similarly, when the big columns of material desire increase, the clear water of consciousness is dried up. Therefore, these columns of kusha grass should be cut or thrown away from the very beginning. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu has instructed that uh, if from the very beginning we do not take care of unwanted grass in the paddy fields, the fertilizing agents or water will be used by them, and the paddy plants will dry up. The material desire for sense enjoyment is the cause of our fall down in this material world, and thus we suffer the threefold miseries and continuous birth, death, old age, and disease. However, if we turn our desires toward the transcendental loving service of the Lord, our desires become purified. We cannot kill desires. We have to purify them of different designations. If we constantly think of being a member of a particular nation, society, or family, and continuously think about them, we become very strongly entangled in the condition of life of birth and death. But if our desires are applied to the service of the Lord, they become purified, and thus we become immediately free from material contamination. Well, that's a very nice statement here. It says, the material desire for sense gratification is the cause of our fall down in the material world. Okay. And thus we suffer the threefold miseries and continuous birth, death, old age, and disease. However, if we turn our desires toward the transcendental loving service of the Lord, our desires become purified. We cannot kill desires. We have to purify them of different designations. If we constantly think of being a member of a particular nation, society, or family, and continuously think about them, we become very strongly entangled in the conditioned life of birth and death. But if our desires are applied to the service of the Lord, they become purified, and thus we become immediately freed from material contamination. Very nice statement. Okay, so text number 31. When one deviates from his original consciousness, he loses the capacity to remember his previous position or recognize his present one. When remembrance is lost, all knowledge acquired is based on a false foundation. When this occurs, learned scholars consider that the soul is lost. Wow. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. The living entity, or the soul, is ever existing and eternal. It cannot be lost. But learned scholars say that it is lost when actual knowledge is not working. That is the difference between animals and human beings. According to less intelligent philosophers, animals have no soul. But factually, animals have souls. Due to the animals' gross ignorance, however, it appears that they have lost their souls. Without the soul, the body cannot move. That is the difference between a living body and a dead body. When the soul is out of the body is called dead. The soul is said to be lost when there is no proper knowledge exhibited. Our original consciousness is Krishna consciousness because we are part and parcel of Krishna. When this consciousness is misguided and one is put into the material atmosphere, which pollutes the original consciousness, one thinks that he is a product of the material elements. Thus, one loses his real remembrance of his position as part and parcel of the Supreme Personality of God. Just as a man who sleeps forgets himself in this way, when the activities of proper consciousness are checked, all activities of the lost soul are performed on a false basis. At the present moment, human civilization is acting on a false platform of bodily identification. Therefore, it can be said that people at the present age have lost their souls, and in this respect, they are no better than animals. Whoa. Text 32. There is no stronger obstruction in one's self-interest than thinking other subject matters to be more pleasing than one's self-realization. Translation. Purport. Human life is especially meant for self-realization. Self refers to the super self and the individual self. The Supreme Personality of Godhead and the living entity. When, however, one becomes more interested in the body and bodily sense gratification, he creates for himself obstructions on the path of self-realization. By the influence of Maya, one becomes more interested in sense gratification, which is prohibited in this world for those interested in self-realization. Instead of becoming interested in sense gratification, one should divert his activities to satisfy the senses of the Supreme Soul. Anyone or anything performed contrary to this principle is certainly against one's self-interest. Text 33. For human society, constantly thinking of how to earn money and apply it for sense gratification brings about the destruction of everyone's interests. When one becomes devoid of knowledge and devotional service, he enters into species of life like those of trees and stones. Wow, that's terrible. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. Jnana, or knowledge, means to understand one's constitutional position. And Vijnana refers to practical application of that knowledge in life. In the human form of life, one should come to the position of jnana and vijnana. But despite this great opportunity, if one does not develop knowledge and practical application of knowledge through the help of a spiritual master and the Shastras, in other words, if one misuses this opportunity, then in the next life, he is sure to be born in a species of non-moving living entities, like dogs, like trees, I'm sorry. Non-moving living entities includes hills, mountains, trees, plants, etc. This stage of life is called punyatam or mukhyatam, namely, making all activities zero. Philosophers who support stopping all activities are called sunyavadi. By nature's own way, our activities are to be gradually diverted to devotional service. But there are philosophers who, instead of purifying their activities, try to make everything zero or void of all activities. This lack of activity is represented by the trees and the hills. This is a kind of punishment inflicted by the laws of nature. If we do not properly exercise our mission of life in self-realization, nature's punishment will render us inactive by putting us in the form of trees and hills. Therefore, activities directed toward sense gratification are condemned herein. One who is constantly thinking of activities to earn money and gratifying the senses is following a path which is suicidal. Factually, all human society is following this path. Some way or other, people are determined to earn money or get money by begging, borrowing, or stealing, and applying that for sense gratification. Such a civilization is the greatest obstacle in the path of self-realization. Text 34. Those who strongly desire to cross the ocean of nescience must not associate with the modes of ignorance. For hedonistic activities are the greatest obstructions to realization of religious principles, economic development, regulated sense gratification, and at last, liberation. Well, you can summarize this by saying anyone who engages in illicit sex, immediately they'll lose their taste for Krishna consciousness. That's what it's saying. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. The four principles of life allow one to live according to religious principles. to earn money according to one's position in society, to allow the senses to enjoy the sense objects according to regulations, and to progress along the path of liberation from this material attachment. As long as the body is there, it is not possible to become completely free from all these material interests. It is not, however, recommended that one act only for sense gratification and earn money for that purpose only, sacrificing all religious principles. At the present moment, human civilization does not care for religious principles. It is, however, greatly interested in economic development without religious principles. For instance, in a slaughterhouse, the butchers certainly get money easily, but such business is not based on religious principles. Similarly, there are many nightclubs for sense gratification and brothels for sex. Sex, of course, is allowed in married life, but prostitution is prohibited because all our activities are ultimately aimed at liberation, at freedom from the clutches of material existence. Similarly, although the government may license liquor shops, this does not mean that liquor shops should be opened unrestrictedly and illicit liquors. Oh, I'm sorry. Let's start over. Similarly, although the government may license liquor shops, this does not mean that liquor shops should be opened unrestrictedly and illicit liquor smuggled. Licensing is meant for restricting. No one has to take a license for sugar, wheat, or milk because there is no need to restrict these things. In other words, it is advised that one not act in a way that will obstruct the regular process of advancement in spiritual life and liberation. The Vedic process of sense gratification is therefore planned in such a way that one can economically develop and enjoy sense gratification and yet ultimately attain liberation. Vedic civilization offers us all knowledge in the Shastras, and if we live a regulated life under the direction of Shastras and Guru, all our material desires will be fulfilled. At the same time, we will be able to go forward to liberation. Oh, that's very interesting. The Vedic process of sense gratification is therefore planned in such a way that one can economically develop and enjoy sense gratification and yet ultimately attain liberation. Vedic civilization offers us all knowledge in the Shastras, and if we live a regulated life under the direction of Shastras and Guru, all our material desires will be fulfilled. At the same time, we'll be able to go forward to liberation. Now, see, that's a very highly significant statement. You don't have to engage in severe, let's say, self mutilation to make spiritual advancement. That's why it says here, the Vedic civilization offers us all knowledge in the Shastras. And if we live a regulated life, meaning waking up early, going to sleep early, eating only prasada, and so forth. That means everything is regulated for spiritual life. Then the Vedic civilization offers us all knowledge in the Shastras, and if we live a regulated life under the direction of Shastras and Guru, all our material desires will be fulfilled. At the same time, we'll be able to go forward to liberation. Okay, so it's not an evil thing to have material desires, but those material desires should be what you would call dovetailed with Krishna consciousness, so that at the same time that we may have some material desires, we can also be able to make spiritual advancement or go forward to liberation. Okay, so we're not trying to stop all, let's say, material desires, but we want to purify those material desires. Okay, so instead of engaging in illicit sex, we have marriage. You can get married and live peacefully with your wife. That's why it says here, if we live a regulated life under the direction of Shastras and Guru, all our material desires will be fulfilled, and at the same time, we'll be able to go forward to liberation. So, if a person has strong material desires, well, they can get married and regulate their desires from the position of being married, and not be wantonly or in a haphazard way engaged in all kinds of sense gratification. A marriage is a way to control the senses if it's done properly. That's why in any civilized organization or any civilized, let's say, world, people are their sex life is regulated by marriage. That's why there is marriage. If you eliminate marriage, then people would be like wild animals. Even the wild animals, they're somewhat regulated. They don't have sex every day. They are regulated. They get in the heat twice a year. So they're regulated. Right? So that's why it's saying here, the Vedic process of sense gratification is therefore planned in such a way that one can economically develop and enjoy sense gratification and yet ultimately attain liberation. Vedic civilization offers us all knowledge in the Shastras, and if we live a regulated life under the direction of Shastras and Guru, all our material desires will be fulfilled. At the same time, we will be able to go forward to liberation. Now, see, that's a very, very profound statement. And that it just shows you the wisdom of Vedic knowledge. The Vedic knowledge is not, let's say, what you would call fanatical. There are fanatical, communities. Like, for example, in some communities, they mutilate the sexual organs of a woman so that she does not feel any satisfaction by having sex. So they'll take a young girl and mutilate her sex organs. So she might be able to have children, but she will not feel any, let's say, satisfaction because her sex organs are mutilated. Now, that is really something very, you know, okay, look this up. Look up child mutilation to stop any pleasure of sex. There are communities like that at a certain young age they will mutilate the sex organs. That doesn't mean you can't have a baby, but you will not be able to feel any sexual pleasure. What does it say? Vedic civilization offers us all knowledge in the Shastras. And if we live a regulated life under the direction of Shastras and Guru, all our material desires will be fulfilled. At the same time, we'll be able to go forward to liberation. So, in the Vedic civilization, we don't mutilate the sexual organs of a woman. We don't mutilate anyone. But we teach people how to control and regulate their sex desires and sexual activity. That's why Prabhupada says, if we live a regulated life under the direction of Shastras and Guru, all our material desires will be fulfilled. At the same time, we will be able to go forward to liberation. That's real culture. Okay, did you find something? Mutilation of children's sex organs.
I think we're hitting on the violating terms of use.
Yeah.
What's that?
Yeah,
what?
ChatGPT said you violated the terms of use. Maybe it's a topic that they don't want to.
Yeah.
Oh, really? It says that?
Yeah.
Yes,
yeah,
Maharaj.
yeah.
Something.
So I got some response. It says child mutilation to control sex life typically refers to practices like female genital mutilation.
Yeah, exactly right. That's what we're talking about. Yeah.
In some contexts, non-consensual medical or surgical interventions or intersex children. These acts, like I will go to the points. So this is the first point is definition. The partial or total removal of the external female
Genitalia.
or injury to the female genital organs for non-medical reasons. So this is a definition for this.
Yeah, it's so that she doesn't feel any sexual satisfaction when having sex. So they purposely mutilate the sex organs. Go ahead.
And then it says the purpose is to reduce the sexual desire or ensure modesty.
It's completely what you would call artificial, but it's very, very stressful for young children, and they get to be a teenager, and then their parents mutilate their sex organs, and they go out throughout life like that. It's like horrible. Some kids, knowing what's going to happen, they'll run away from home. There are examples, many examples, not many, but there are some examples of teenage girls that run away because they know that their sex organs are going to get mutilated. And why do the parents mutilate the sex organs of a young girl so she doesn't feel any sexual pleasure in life? That means that she can have sex, but she doesn't feel anything. Uh, and why do they do that? So that they can control a woman from getting involved in illicit activities. But it's very, very, let's say, uh, unnecessary type of fanaticism to do such a thing. It's better to teach people to control themselves, right? But they purposely do that so that young uh, kids cannot feel any sexual pleasure because their sexual organs are mutilated. Right? So is that what it says?
Yes, Maharaj. It says this is to reduce sexual desire
Yeah.
or ensure modesty.
I mean, they're not going to have any sex pleasure. And they're going to have sex, but then it's not pleasurable at all. And why do they do that? Well, it's an artificial way to control, the sexual desire. But there are other ways to control sexual desire. It's called Krishna consciousness. You don't have to mutilate the sexual organs of a woman in order to avoid sexual, let's say, desire. You can control your sexual desire by practice of Krishna consciousness, right? Regulated principles, etc. So you see how there are fanatical practices. It's usually the Muslims that do this, and young girls sometimes run away from home. Uh, otherwise, now why are they doing this? Because the Muslims think that if they mutilate the sexual organs of a woman, the woman will not feel any sexual pleasure. And they'll still have sex, but don't feel any pleasure, right? And it's a way to control the life of a woman, that she'll never be able to have sexual pleasure, so she won't cheat on her husband or something like that. Some crazy idea. So is that what it's saying?
Yes.
Yeah.
And further, Maharaj says about consequences.
Yeah.
It causes severe pain,
Oh, yeah.
bleeding,
Yeah.
long-term health problems,
Yeah.
and psychological trauma.
Yeah. Yeah, and you get it like a 12-year-old girl and you mutilate her sex organs. It's horrible. And she's going to go through the whole life like that. She can't feel any sexual pleasure, and it's dangerous also. I mean, because you're mutilating some part of the body, so it's not a natural thing. It's completely artificial. Why can't you teach people to control their senses? Right. That's the right way. That's what civilized people do. You know, but the Muslims, they will mutilate the sex organs of a young girl that's only 12 years old, so that she will never ever feel any sexual pleasure throughout her life. And you can just understand how stressful that is for a young kid. As soon as she becomes uh, a teenager, they mutilate her sex organs, and it's a regular practice amongst Muslims.
And also mostly in the African countries, Maharaj. It's very common in many countries in Africa.
Okay, many countries in Africa, there are young girls that run away from home when they know that that's going to happen to them. Not all of them, but there are many examples of girls that run away from home. Now they're separated from their family. They're on their own. They're a little teenager. Imagine, how stressful that can be. There are some famous, uh, uh, let's say, Hollywood stars who were born like in the Muslim countries who ran away from home because they didn't want to be mutilated. They didn't want their sex organs to be mutilated. And somehow or other, they became famous movie stars. And they write books about, how they had to run away and how harrowing it was to know that your own parents are going to mutilate their sex organs. But it's a normal practice in many Muslim countries. Okay, so now we'll go to text 35. Out of the four principles, namely religion, economic development, sense gratification, and liberation, liberation has to be taken very seriously. The other three are subject to destruction by stringent law of nature, meaning death. So let me read that again. Out of the four principles, namely religion, economic development, sense gratification, and liberation, liberation has to be taken very seriously. The other three, meaning religion, economic development, and sense gratification, are subject to destruction by the stringent law of nature or death. Okay, now let's try and understand what that means. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. Moksha, or liberation, has to be taken very seriously, even at the sacrifice of the other three items. Those other three items are religion, economic development, and sense gratification. As advised by Sutta Goswami in the beginning of Srimad Bhagavatam, religious principles are not based on success in economic development. Because we are very attached to sense gratification, we go to God, to the temple or churches for some economic reasons. Then again, economic development does not mean sense gratification. Everything should be adjusted in such a way that we attain liberation. Therefore, in this verse, liberation, moksha, is stressed. The other three items are material and therefore subject to destruction. Okay, so you're talking about religion, economic development, and sense gratification and liberation. So of the first three, religion, economic development, sense gratification, you have to be very careful of those things because it can very easily turn you into a sense gratifier if not properly regulated. Okay, so it says moksha, or liberation, has to be taken very seriously, even at the sacrifice of the other three items. What are the other three items? Religion, economic development, and sense gratification. As advised by Sutta Goswami in the beginning of Srimad Bhagavatam, religious principles are not based on success in economic development because we are very attached to sense gratification. We go to God, to the temple or churches for some economic reasons. Then again, economic development does not mean sense gratification. Everything should be adjusted in such a way that we attain liberation. Therefore, in this verse, liberation or moksha is stressed. The other three items are material and therefore subject to destruction. So, religion, economic development, sense gratification are what you would say things that have to be very, very carefully regulated. Otherwise, it can destroy the opportunity to become liberated in this lifetime. Therefore, in this verse, liberation, moksha, is stressed. The other three items are material and therefore subject to destruction. Even if somehow we accumulate a great bank balance, meaning a lot of riches in this life, and possess many material things, everything will be finished with death. In the Bhagavad Gita, it is said that death is the supreme personality of Godhead, who ultimately takes away everything acquired by the materialistic person. Foolishly, we do not care for this. In other words, foolish people are not understanding that sense gratification is not the real purpose of life. Right? Foolishly, we are not afraid of death, nor do we consider that death will take away everything acquired by the process of dharma, artha, and karma. Kama. By dharma, or pious activities, we may be elevated to the heavenly planets, but this does not mean freedom from the clutches of birth, death, old age, and disease. The purport is that we can sacrifice our interest in Trivargya, meaning religious principles, economic development, and sense gratification. But we cannot sacrifice the cause of liberation. Regarding liberation, it is stated in Bhagavad Gita 4.9, Tyaktva punarjanma naiti. Liberation means that after giving up this body, one does not have to accept another material body. To the impersonalist, liberation means merging into the existence of the impersonal Brahman. But factually, this is not moksha, this is not liberation, because one has to again fall down into this material world from that impersonal position. One should therefore seek the shelter of the Supreme Personality Godhead and engage in his devotional service. That is real liberation. The conclusion is that we should not stress pious activities, economic development, and sense gratification, but should concern ourselves with approaching Lord Vishnu in his spiritual planets, of which the topmost is Goloka Vrindavana, where Lord Krishna lives. Therefore, this Krishna consciousness movement is the greatest gift for persons who are actually desiring liberation. Okay, so now, at one time in America, and it's still there also, there were there was a class of people who lived very regulated life, and it was fanatical. And that type of, in other words, laughing and having a good time was forbidden. And you had to always be very, very, circumspect and control your mind and senses. Now, in one sense, that's good. but they took it to an extreme fanatical stage. Okay, so here it says that it says, out of the four principles, namely religion, economic development, sense gratification, and liberation, liberation has to be taken very seriously. The other three are subject to destruction by the stringent law of nature, meaning death. Okay. So religion should have the number one position in our life. So then, in the purport, it says moksha or liberation has to be taken very seriously, even at the sacrifice of the other three being economic development, sense gratification, and liberation. Oh, no, religion, economic development, and sense gratification. Moksha or liberation has to be taken seriously, even at the sacrifice of the other three items. As advised by Sutta Goswami in the beginning of Srimad Bhagavatam, religious principles are not based on success in economic development because we are very attached to sense gratification. We go to God, to the temple or churches for some economic reasons. And again, economic development does not mean sense gratification. Everything should be adjusted in such a way that we attain liberation. Therefore, in this verse, liberation or moksha is stressed. The other three items are material and therefore subject to destruction. Even if somehow we accumulate a great bank balance in this life and possess many material things, everything will be finished with death. In Bhagavad Gita, it is said that death is the supreme personality of Godhead who ultimately takes away everything acquired by the materialistic person. Foolishly, we do not care for this. Foolishly, we are not afraid of death, nor do we consider that death will take away everything acquired by the process of dharma, artha, and kama. By dharma or pious activities, we may be elevated to the heavenly planets, but this does not mean freedom from the clutches of birth, death, old age, and disease. The purport is that we can sacrifice our interest in trivargya, religious principles, economic development, and sense gratification. But we cannot sacrifice the cause of liberation. Regarding liberation, it is stated in Bhagavad Gita 4.9, Tyaktva deham punarnaiti. Liberation means that after giving up this body, one does not have to accept another material body. To the impersonalist, liberation means merging into the existence of impersonal Brahman. But factually, this is not moksha, because one has to again fall down into the material world from that impersonal position. One should therefore seek the shelter of the Supreme Personality of Godhead and engage in his devotional service. That is real liberation. The conclusion is that we should not stress pious activities, economic development, and sense gratification, but should concern ourselves with approaching Lord Vishnu in his spiritual planets, of which the topmost is Goloka Vrindavana, where Lord Krishna lives. Therefore, this Krishna consciousness movement is the greatest gift for persons who are actually desiring liberation. Okay, so the problem is that people do not want to have the best and the most significant type of liberation. They want to have partial liberation to enjoy sense gratification for a period of time. But that you cannot uninterruptedly have sense gratification. It's not possible. There always will be problems in life. So therefore, the best thing is to regulate sense gratification according to the principles of Krishna consciousness and be satisfied with a regulated life. You regulate your eating, your sleeping, your mating, and your defending. Why? So that you have time to develop spiritually. Okay, so and that's why it says here, the purport is that we can sacrifice our interest in trivargya, religious principles, economic development, and sense gratification. But we cannot sacrifice the cause of liberation. Regarding liberation, it is stated in Bhagavad Gita 4.9, Tyaktva Punarjanma Naiti. Liberation means that after giving up this body, one does not have to accept another material body. To the impersonalist, liberation means merging into the existence of impersonal Brahman. But factually, this is not moksha or liberation because one has to again fall down into the material world from that impersonal position. One should therefore seek the shelter of the Supreme Personality Godhead and engage in his devotional service. Okay, so that's the major takeaway right there. That is real liberation. So there is something that looks like liberation, but is not full liberation. That's what the Mayavadis achieve. And therefore they fall down. But real liberation is seeking the shelter of the Supreme Personality Godhead and engage in his devotional service. That is real liberation. The conclusion is that we should not stress pious activities, economic development, and sense gratification, but should concern ourselves with approaching Lord Vishnu in his spiritual planets, of which the topmost is Goloka Vrindavana, where Lord Krishna lives. Therefore, this Krishna consciousness movement is the greatest gift for persons who are actually desiring liberation. Yeah, the fake liberation of the Mayavadis is not going to be eternal. It's going to be temporary. So although it looks like someone is renounced, is following some kind of a spiritual path, but it's not pure, and therefore they'll fall down. In Krishna consciousness, if we follow strictly, it's pure, and we will not fall down, and we'll be able to have a regulated life and attain liberation at the end of life.
Hare Krishna Maharaj, I have a question here. Maharaj, in Ajamal's pastime, is my understanding correct that he got liberated because we got lucky? He called out his son's name Narayan, but then he had to come back again to, do more austerities and penances to go back. Is that right?
Yes. Yes. By remembering or saying the name of Narayan before he died, even though he had a sinful life, the fact that he remembered Narayana at the moment of death, even though he was not really meaning Narayana, he was just calling his son, right? But he said the name of the Lord at the moment of death. Now, you have the what you call, what do they call oh jeez, what is it called? Anyway, because he named his son Narayan. He was calling his son at the moment of death, right? So when he died, he went back to Godhead. Now, you have the people who are the followers of Vedic knowledge. They became a little confused because all his life he was a sinner. So why should he go back to Godhead? And when he called out the name of his son, who he named Narayana, he didn't do it. It wasn't because he loved the Lord Narayana. He was just, calling out for his son. But the name of Narayana is absolute. So he became purified and he became liberated, right? So you have the what do you call them? The Yamadutas and you have the Vishnudutas, right? The Vishnudutas became upset. So what's going on here? This guy, his whole life he was a sense gratifier, and when he called out the name of Narayana, he meant his son. He gave his son that name. He didn't mean that he had love for Lord Narayana, right? But it doesn't matter because the name of Narayana is absolute, right? So therefore, he got a second chance, right? He did die, but he had it. He didn't die. He should have died, but he didn't. And he had a second chance to make spiritual advancement. So, but that just shows that the name of Narayana is absolute. Whether it's a demon that says it out of joking or to make fun of it, or a devotee that says it out of reverence, both ways one is benefited. Just like some people, they'll see devotees and say, "Oh, here comes the Hare Krishnas." They don't mean Hare Krishna and with any reverence, right? But they make spiritual advancement because they said Hare Krishna. Okay, so the purport is that we can sacrifice our interests in Trivarga, meaning religious principles, economic development, and sense gratification. But we cannot sacrifice the cause of liberation. Regarding liberation, it is stated in Bhagavad Gita 4.9, Tyakva deham punarjanma naiti. Liberation means that after giving up this body, one does not have to accept another material body. To the impersonalist, liberation means merging into the existence of impersonal Brahman. But factually, this is not liberation or moksha, because one has to again fall down into this material world from that impersonal position. One should therefore seek the shelter of the Supreme Personality of Godhead and engage in his devotional service. That is real liberation. The conclusion is that we should not stress pious activities, economic development, and sense gratification, but should concern ourselves with approaching Lord Vishnu and his spiritual planets, of which the topmost is Goloka Vrindavana, where Krishna lives. Therefore, this Krishna consciousness movement is the greatest gift for persons who are actually desiring liberation. Okay, any questions or comments? That's why it says, therefore, this Krishna consciousness movement is the greatest gift for persons who are actually desiring liberation. So simply by chanting Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, respecting prasadam with reverence and associating with genuine devotees and hearing lectures given by genuine devotees and going on Sankirtan and chanting the glories of the Lord in public and always following the regulative principles of Krishna consciousness. No meat eating, no gambling, no illicit sex, no intoxication. Always chanting Hare Krishna, Hare Mantra, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, and hearing lectures given by bona fide devotees and going on Sankirtan and eating only Krishna prasadam. One can make tangible spiritual progress in this lifetime and be, let's say, ready to go back to Godhead. Okay. And here's a very interesting statement. It says, one should seek the shelter of the Supreme Personality Godhead and engage in his devotional service. That is real liberation. Okay, that's our takeaway today. One should seek the shelter of the Supreme Personality Godhead and engage in his devotional service. That is real liberation. The conclusion is that we should not stress pious activities, economic development, and sense gratification, but should concern ourselves with approaching Lord Vishnu in his spiritual planets, of which the topmost is Goloka Vrindavana, where Lord Krishna lives. Therefore, this Krishna consciousness movement is the greatest gift for persons who are actually desiring liberation. Okay, so we shouldn't stress pious activities, economic development, and sense gratification. However, we should concern ourselves with approaching Lord Vishnu in his spiritual planets, of which the topmost is Goloka Vrindavana. That's our takeaway for today. All right, any questions, comments? Thank you very much, my dear devotees. Now, today, we should meditate on what? Moksha, or liberation, has to be taken very seriously, even at the sacrifice of the other three items, meaning religion, economic development, and sense gratification. So we should be very interested in moksha, meaning liberation. And therefore, as advised by Sutta Goswami in the beginning of Srimad Bhagavatam, religious principles are not based on success and economic development. Because we're very attached to sense gratification, we go to God, to the temple or churches for some economic reasons. Then again, economic development does not mean sense gratification. Everything should be adjusted in such a way that we attain liberation. Therefore, in this verse, liberation of moksha or moksha is stressed. The other three items are material and therefore subject to destruction. Even if somehow we accumulate a great bank balance in this life, meaning a lot of money, and possess many material things, everything will be finished with death. In Bhagavad Gita it is said that death is the Supreme Personality of Godhead who ultimately takes away everything acquired by the materialistic person. Foolishly, we do not care for this. Foolishly, we are not afraid of death, nor do we consider that death will take away everything acquired by the process of dharma, artha, and kama. By dharma or pious activities, we may be elevated to the heavenly planets, but this does not mean freedom from the clutches of birth, death, old age, and disease. The purport is that we can sacrifice our interest in Trivardhya, religious principles, economic development, and sense gratification, but we cannot sacrifice the cause of liberation. Regarding liberation, it is stated in Bhagavad Gita 4.9, Tyakvadeham punarjanmanaiti. Liberation means that after giving up this body, one does not have to accept another material body. To the impersonalist, liberation means merging into the existence of impersonal Brahman. But factually, this is not moksha or liberation, because one has to again fall down into the material world from that impersonal position. One should therefore seek the shelter of the Supreme Personality of Godhead and engage in his devotional service. That is real liberation. The conclusion is that we should not stress pious activities, economic development, and sense gratification, but should concern ourselves with approaching Lord Vishnu in his spiritual planets, of which the topmost is Goloka Vrindavana, where Lord Krishna lives. Therefore, this Krishna consciousness movement is the greatest gift for persons who are actually desiring liberation. So we should follow the regulative principles very strictly. Always chant Hare Krishna, Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hear lectures given by bona fide devotees and listen very carefully to the Shastric knowledge in the Srimad Bhagavatam and Bhagavad Gita. Then we will have, and of course, eat only Krishna Prasadam and so forth. Then we'll have a real spiritual life in this world, even though we're living in Kali Yuga, the worst time to be in the material world. But for us, it's the best time because we are not interested in sense gratification. In previous ages, people could have very advanced sense gratification. In Kali Yuga, there's also sense gratification, but it's very abominable. And in previous ages, the sense gratification was more, let's say, high class, and it's very low class in Kali Yuga. But when we use our senses to please the senses of Krishna, that is the real process of Krishna consciousness. So therefore we have deity worship, therefore we chant Hare Krishna, Mahamantra, we go on Sankirtan, we preach. All of these things are for pleasing the senses of Krishna. Whereas material life is, we don't care about Krishna. We want to please our own senses. And because of that, we remain victims of the cycle of birth, death, old age, and disease. Okay, so our takeaway today is the following. One should therefore seek the shelter of the Supreme Personality of Godhead and engage in his devotional service. That is real liberation. The conclusion is that we should not stress pious activities, economic development, and sense gratification, but should concern ourselves with approaching Lord Vishnu in his spiritual planets, of which The topmost is Goloka Vrindavana, where Lord Krishna lives. Therefore, this Krishna consciousness movement is the greatest gift for persons who are actually desiring liberation. Hare Krishna. That we should meditate on today. Very profound statements given in this Canto 4, Chapter 22, verse 35. Okay, my dear devotees, are there any questions or comments anyone would like to make? Okay, since there is a deep sense of quiet, we will adjourn our today at the morning program, and the next program is the evening program where we hear
Maharaj,
more.
one question, Maharaj.
Huh?
One question.
Oh, okay. Okay.
So in the past, we heard from you, right, in different lectures, these 4 pillars.
Yeah.
Right. Dharma, Artha, Kama, Moksha.
Moksha.
The 3, if they are followed regulated way, they will lead to liberation, is what we heard, right? Even though you are right, even though in the purport it is said it is all gone as the body is gone, but the confusion here is they lead to liberation or no?
The purport is that we can sacrifice our interest in trivargya, religious principles, economic development, and sense gratification. But we cannot sacrifice the cause of liberation. Okay. Regarding liberation, it's stated in Bhagavad Gita 4.9, Tyaktva deham punarjanma naiti. Liberation means that after giving up this body, one does not have to accept another material body. Okay, so that's our takeaway, that we should be very interested in liberation in this lifetime. And the easiest way to do that is simply to follow Krishna consciousness. Right? We don't have to do anything else, but follow it without material desires. Our desires should be to go back to Godhead. Right? But even that, we don't even have to even ask Krishna for liberation. Krishna, whatever Krishna gives us, whether we're going to stay in the material world and preach and be a devotee, or go back to the spiritual world and continue preaching and being a devotee, it's the same thing for a devotee. Okay? So the devotee doesn't even ask for liberation, which is another material desire. The devotee will accept whatever situation he finds himself in and will engage or dovetail everything he does in Krishna consciousness. Whether he's living in a communist country or in a capitalist country, wherever he is, somehow or other, he'll make that place Krishna conscious. Now, that means that the devotee is not preoccupied by wanting moksha. Real moksha is full-time engagement in devotional service. That's the real moksha, right? It's not, you get some wings and you fly up to the some spiritual world. Real moksha is you're always engaged in Krishna's service. Then you are liberated.
That means it's a complete detachment, Maharaj.
No, complete attachment would be you are not interested in Krishna consciousness also.
It's like you buy. It's like
No, you don't want to throw the baby out with the bath water, right? The real detachment is always chanting Hare Krishna. Now you're detached. But in Mayavada, we say, no. That means you're still involved with the material world because you're chanting and dancing and eating nice prasadam. No, that's what we're meant to do because it's part of Krishna consciousness, pleasing Krishna. Krishna doesn't want us to perform severe tapasya or to mutilate our body in any way. He wants us to use all our faculties in the service of Krishna. Right? Okay. All glories to Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Okay, so our takeaway is one should therefore seek the shelter of the Supreme Personality of Godhead and engage in his devotional service. That is real liberation. So, devotional service. We should engage in devotional service. That is real liberation. Haribol.
Prabhupada has explained in one line.
Yeah.
Real liberation.
Yeah. Hare Krishna. All glories to Srila Prabhupada ki jai.
It's amazing how Prabhupada simplify complex topics.
Yeah. Well, because he's a pure devotee. That's why. Pure devotees can give you the kernel of truth. They don't say it may be this, it may be that. Right? They tell you what is the fundamental truth. And here it is. Fundamental truth is that the purport is we can sacrifice our interests in religious principles, economic development, sense gratification, but we cannot sacrifice the cause of liberation. There it is. Regarding liberation, is stated in Bhagavad Gita, Tyakvadeham Punarajanma Naiti. Liberation means that after giving up this body, one does not have to accept another material body. So that's what we should be concerned about. That instead of engaging in activities that produce karma, we should be engaged in akarmic activities so we don't build up another material body in the next life. That we are liberated of the body and we get a spiritual body and go back to the spiritual world. Liberation means that after giving up this material body, one does not have to accept another material body. There it is. You get a spiritual body, you go back to the spiritual world, that solves all your problems. Hare Krishna.